Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
Should you spend $300 on the Crazyfast Plus or save 40 bucks and go for the Crazyfast Elite? Let's talk about that. Both of which, by the way, you can get below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. With by far the biggest difference between these two being the weight, and that's not to suggest that one is heavy, but one is significantly lighter. Both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the $260 Elite model. You can see that they weigh in at a very lightweight 6.8 ounces, the equivalent of 193 grams. Change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the Crazyfast Plus, and you can see that they weigh in at 5.9 ounces, the equivalent of 168 grams. In other words, the Elite model is going to be in the same weight range within a couple grams of basically all the most popular speed boots, predominantly the Vapor 15 and Superfly 9 Elite from Nike, whereas the Crazyfast Plus is simply put the lightest football boot on the market by quite a large margin, and pretty well the lightest thing since the early variations of the F50 Adizeros. So if you are looking for that weightless feel, absolutely nothing does that better than these boots right here. The next significant difference you'll find between these two is what's happening across the top of the foot, where the Elite model features what a lot of top-end football boots have these days, a one-piece construction, where it's basically elasticated knit material across the top of the foot, fused to either side of the upper. In this case, it's made from their prime knit, and it utilizes a dual lace hole setup to secure your foot in place, whereas the Crazyfast Plus features what is a more traditional U-throat construction, where there's an opening in the middle of the upper and then a standalone tongue with a more traditional lacing system using a single lace hole setup. And as you can see with the two boots side by side, it's not a big difference, but the lacing system does run a little bit deeper on the Crazyfast Plus, and you simply have more lacing positions. What does this mean for performance? Well, truthfully, not a lot. I would say the Crazyfast Plus, because the opening is just significantly bigger, it makes putting the boots on a lot easier as well as taking them off. But in terms of the actual touch difference on the ball, I wouldn't say that there really is one. You could make the argument that the one-piece design does feel a little bit more seamless on the Elite model, and certainly if you've been wearing Adidas speed boots for the last several years, this might come across as being more familiar to you, but realistically, I would definitely say it's more of a matter of personal preference in terms of which one might be better when it comes to feel. Speaking of feel, the uppers, and I'll keep things short and sweet here. Yes, technically the Crazy Light Plus does feature a slightly thinner textile-based material. You can see it's borderline see-through, maybe not the best on this particular colorway, where of course the Elite model is also super thin, but just has a little bit of extra structure to it. To the touch, this is noticeably stiffer, but when the boots are on feet, and certainly once you've worn them a little bit, it is almost impossible to tell a difference between the two when it comes to overall feel for the ball. So if you're looking for that raw barefoot sensation with no extra padding, both of these will provide that exceptionally well. With the only real distinction you can make between these two uppers is that the Elite model comes across as being a little bit more structured than what you're going to find from the Plus, but again, the difference is extremely minimal. While they're both technically low-cut boots, they do feature very different heel constructions, where again, the Elite model is along the lines of what we've been getting from the Adidas brand, maybe a little bit less bulky than what we had on the Speed Portal that came before it, but in general, it tapers quite a bit at the back and pinches the heel a little bit tighter with a more padding than what you're going to find in the heel liner versus the Plus model, which is a little bit more straight up and down in terms of its shaping, less padding at the back, and generally just wider and more open in terms of its overall shape, where I would actually make the argument that because of the more narrow profile of the Elite, the heel lockdown is slightly better, but that's not to say that there's an issue with what you have here in the Crazyfast Plus. Again, it's kind of a battle of more of a modern feel versus more of a traditional one, where the winner of the two is really going to come down to your own personal preferences. When it comes to sole plates and stud patterns, despite the slightly more shiny finish that you're going to find more often than not on the more expensive Plus model, the speed frame, the stud pattern, exactly the same on both. Nothing really to talk about here. These are excellent sole plates and stud patterns in terms of what's out there right now in the speed boot category. Despite being so similar on paper, the fit and feel on feet between these two is actually quite a bit different, even down to the overall shape. And of course, they are on the same sole plate, so you would think the shape would be almost identical, but because of the difference in construction of the upper, the U-throat construction of the Plus versus the one-piece design of the Elite, you end up with two football boots, one that feels a little bit more traditional in terms of how the upper wraps your foot, where you're going to get that little bit of flaring at the ankle like a more traditional design will typically have when you get an upper this thin, but the way that it grabs your foot is maybe a little bit more forgiving in terms of still wrapping very closely, but without giving you that squeezing your foot sensation. And because the upper on the Plus is also that little bit thinner and a little bit more flexible, it just doesn't feel quite as stiff and rigid as what you're going to find from the Elite model. And of course, that difference in design through the heel, again, being more traditional, it's just not quite as tight. Where the Elites, with their one-piece construction, they definitely feel more stiff on feet, especially out of the box, and they feel slimmer, particularly through the midfoot in the arch area of the foot. Not uncomfortably so, but it definitely feels like the upper doesn't have the same ability to adjust to the shape of your foot. It's more of a predetermined shape, which again is very much on par with a lot of Adidas speed boots that they've put out over the last several years. The lacing system itself also doesn't seem to run as deep, so I don't think the boot feels quite as snug or secure in the forefoot area. But again, that's something that's going to vary a lot from person to person, depending on the specific shape of your foot. And like I mentioned earlier, the heel is a little bit more padded and generally just wraps closer and squeezes the back of your foot a little bit tighter than what the Plus has on offer. From a width perspective, there is definitely more width to the Plus model over the Elite, although both boots will work well for most foot types, especially if you've worn Adidas speed boots in the past. There's really no reason why you wouldn't fit well into either of these, but if you are looking for the widest option of the two, it's definitely the more expensive Plus. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing both of these boots in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So regardless of which one you go for, I would strongly recommend going true to size to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, is the $300 Crazyfast Plus legitimately worth the extra $40 over the $260 Elite model? Well, to some people, yes, and to others, probably not. Despite the idea being presented by Adidas of an Elite model and then an ultra premium, even better model, I think it's really hard to say that the Plus is truly better than what you can get from the Elite, and I think this is easily seen in what you're going to see in professional representation. There's plenty of pros wearing the Plus, and there are arguably even more pros wearing the Elite. Why is that the case? Well, because the Elite is familiar compared to what Adidas speed boots have been over the last several years, and plenty of pros as well as plenty of regular consumers like having that consistency. If that's you, save the money, go for the Elite, where I think the Plus is more of a standout in regards to having a little bit more of that traditional feel in terms of how it wraps your foot, predominantly because of that more traditional U-throat construction, as well as the heel design, and of course the benefit of them just being as light as they are. They do have that weightless sensation that while these aren't heavy, they're nowhere near as light as what you're going to get from the Pluses. For me personally, I like the Plus mainly because I find them just that little bit more comfortable, but between these two football boots, there is absolutely not a bad choice.